We can get started. Hello everyone, welcome to this talk on QGIS automation. Before we get started, raise your hands if you use QGIS. Perfect. Raise your hands if you have built a model using the Model Designer. A few of you? Okay, great. This talk I'm going to share some tips and tricks of the QGIS Model Designer. We're going to cover some case studies where I've used this, and I'm going to share some of the ways you can automate your workflows if you have a manual workflow, how to automate this. And also I'm going to share some of the ways how far you can push this tool. It's a really capable tool, and I want to share some of the really cool things you can do with it. All the case studies have, there are a lot of links in this. We have all the workflows documented. So if you want to get access to the slide deck, you can just take a picture of the slides and you'll be good to go. I run a company called Spatial Thoughts. It's a learning platform for modern geospatial technologies. I love QGIS. We do a lot of work with QGIS, and also we support the QGIS project and also teach QGIS courses. We are a certified training provider. QGIS comes with this built-in workflow modeling tool where you can take a bunch of processing steps and chain them together into a single workflow. So if you have used QGIS and if you run some tools and you say, this is great, I can solve my problem, but then you want to do this over and over again, you can actually chain all of those together visually without writing any code. And now you have a new tool which can run all the steps for you. And it can be helpful in automating repetitive processes, or it can also be helpful if you have a really complex workflow and you want to make it reproducible. It also is a great documentation for the workflow where you can say, I know exactly how I did this. Right? So again, there are many use cases, and the QGIS has really, this tool has really evolved into an automation tool that all of you can use. It's important to note that this is a no-code solution. That means you don't have to write Python code. You can just visually connect tools. It's also a great way to get into programming where you can say, I can use QGIS. This will give you a lot of the same constructs as programming, and it can get you like almost there. You can do a lot of things, and then it's a great stepping stone into kind of doing automation with Python afterwards. The first case study I want to start with is where we want to automate some map creation. All of you might be thinking, if I do some processing, some analysis, I can automate that. But what if my process involves creating some maps? How can I automate this, and how can I kind of take the whole workflow into QGIS? This was a project where we wanted to automate a production of maps, which had to be produced daily. You fetch the latest data from this server every morning, clean it up, apply some styles, and produce a map with a specific map template. And the person said, I need to come to office every day, open QGIS, do all these processes, download data, and then put the map in a shared folder, and I'm done. And then when I'm going on a vacation, I need to find somebody who can do this for me, and it was like a pain thing. So can we automate the whole thing? And all the way from downloading data to cleaning it up to creating styles, so applying a style and then creating map. And can we do this automatically? So you can do it even when you're not present. Okay. So the first thing, QGIS has this built-in tool for downloading data. If you download data from a public URL, you can just use this download file tool. It'll run and download data. The great thing about this, it respects all the QGIS proxy settings and network settings, so you don't have to worry about it. It just does it. There's also a tool where you can call an API and configure credentials. That is built into the processing toolbox. You don't have to kind of write Python code for this. Right? So again, you can use these tools to get any data that you want for a project right in QGIS. Once you have it, you can apply all a bunch of processing tools for doing geoprocessing. You can apply filters and do some spatial intersections. Here we just said this is extent of this data is very large. We just want to intersect it and select the data for our region of interest. Once you have this, now we want to apply a style. The styling, well, you have a layer, you create a style, you can do all the complex styling in QGIS. Once you have it, you can save it as a file, a QML file. And now there's a tool which says, apply a QML style to this layer. And that means when you are automating your workflow, it says, here's my QML file. Here's my layer I generated in the previous step. Please apply it. And it styles this layer. Right? So this is a great way to kind of do cartography in your processing. Next, there are a bunch of cartography tools in the processing toolbox where you can if you have a print layout, which you configure and say, here's my title, here's all the layout elements I want, here's where the map goes. And now you can say, here's my template, which I've saved in a QGIS project, and I'm running my workflow. You can say, I've generated some layer through this process, go and render this print layout with this data. And it just renders it. You can say, render it as a PNG or a PDF, and that happens in your workflow. So again, you can set up your project once, and then now you can run this workflow, and you have your map that'll be created. And this is the tool for rendering map. Here we use the rendering to PNG, but you can render it to PDFs if you wanted to. And now, once you have figured out all the steps, you can now start chaining them together. So you can say, I want the input, just go down to the data, apply all the steps, apply the style, render a print layout, and then I just get a map. So now, once I have this model, I can click this run button, and the model runs and does all of this. I just get a map. Since this requires your data from your QGIS project where you saved the layout, you can also save this model inside your QGIS project. It's a great tip if you have a QGIS project, just bundle your models there. So whenever you have opened the project, you'll have your models. You'll never lose your models. So here's what the model run looks like. You just click the run button, say, here's the print layout that you want to render, here's the file, and you run it, and then it just downloads the data, applies all the steps, and you get the map output. So now you have this process which was very manual, cumbersome, which we've automated this. It's reproducible, and it's automated. But not quite fully. You still have to open QGIS, click this button, and get this, right? And that means I still have to come to office and do this myself. This is the map it produced, but again, we want to automate the full process. QGIS comes with a command line tool. All of you have it if you install QGIS. So this command line tool can run any processing tool or a model on the command line. So now you have this model. You say, here's my project, here's my model, run it through the command line. And now I have a command that I can run on Windows, Linux, Mac, which will run my model. So this command is downloading data, applying the filters, applying the style, rendering the PNG. And now I can take this command, plug it into my Windows scheduler, say, please run this command every day at 6 a.m. And it puts the file in the shared drive. And now I can go on a vacation in a nice beach, and my maps will still be produced. Right? So this is a workflow where some of you may not have known that QGIS can also do data downloading and also rendering maps, and now you can use those tools within that. So this is our first case study. I'll share some tips after each case study. If you use Model Designer, one of these annoyances that I had was I'm very particular of how my model looks, and I always spend hours kind of aligning my model blocks exactly to look right. And now there's a nice feature, which is just you select a bunch of blocks and please align them, and it aligns them to a nice grid. So again, people who want this, it's a great little thing that you can try. All right, so that was the first one on automation. I want to share the next case study where you can do some conditional processing. All of you have workflows, and sometimes your workflow involves saying, if I want to use this layer, then do this. Or if I process the data, if I end up with this kind of value, then you do something else. And the Model Designer has those conditional processing capabilities, so I want to show you how you can apply those. This was a project, again, this is a simplified version of this, where you say, I want to do some site selection. And I have a bunch of input layers, a bunch of things I want to do. But then sometimes I'll have 5 inputs, sometimes I'll have 3 inputs. And if the user selects 3 inputs, you do something different. If the user gives you 5 inputs, you do something different. Right? So how do I set up my workflow where I don't know how many inputs I will get? Right? So here we say I have a condition where I will always have a boundary layer. So I have a buildings layer. Say I want to select all the buildings that are away from boundary. But if you get roads, then you also do further processing where you select the buildings that are also away from roads. But if you don't get roads, just end your workflow there. Right? So now this is kind of a condition that you want to build in your workflow. The Model Designer has this tool, which is called conditional branch, which you can say, add some expression and say, if the input that is given to you is null, do something. If it's not null, do something else. And you can see the conditional branch, the model branches out. And if one condition is met, it'll pick that branch and finish the workflow. If it's not met, it'll pick another branch. And you can have multiple of those in your workflow. So you can just say, here's one branch, do something. Next, you have another branch, you do something. And the branches can use all expressions and other conditions that you can use. Right? So in this case, if you run the model and you say the first time I'm running it, I'm keeping the roads empty. I marked that as an optional input here. So the model runs and I get some output. But now I say I will give you a roads layer and it'll go through a different branch. And once it finishes, you'll see that it generates output that is different from the previous step. I didn't have to change my workflow. I just gave different inputs. Right? And this is something that you can incorporate and make your workflows more flexible. Another tip, old-time QGIS users will remember that in the early days of Model Designer, once you create your inputs and outputs, there's no way to order them in a particular sequence. I think it was alphabetical or something. So you just say, first, give your input, second, you give your output. There was no way to specify in a sequential order. Now there is, so you can just say, I have these 3 inputs, please organize them in certain order and in groups. And it's a nice little feature to be able to kind of present your tool to the user in a specific order that you want. Right? In this case, it says, give me base layer first, give me input points first, and then base layer, and not the other way around. So it just makes more logical sense. Yeah. Right, the last one. This is where I got to do some really crazy stuff with QGIS. There was a project where the client had this really tedious manual workflow where they were getting some hydrological data. So this is rain gauge data that was measured in the field, and you get this monthly data dump. And before you could use this, they wanted to validate the data. And they had this detailed manual process, and they just sent me a manual. Here's our manual, please implement this. And the process said, to validate whether each station had captured this rainfall correctly, you look at all the neighboring stations and check what rainfall they have captured. And if it's in the same range that the neighboring stations, then it looks good. Sometimes what happens is if there's a station and maybe there's a tree overgrowth and it stops recording rain, or there's a malfunction. You don't want to use those data in your downstream modeling, so you need to validate this. Here's what the validation process looked like. Very, very detailed. It said for selecting neighbors of each station, you have to select 8 neighboring stations that are within 10 kilometers. But you don't select all the stations in the same direction. Maybe there are 10 stations in this direction. You say, I want homogeneous distribution across all directions. So you say for each quadrant, you select maximum of 2 stations within 10 kilometers. And once you pick your stations, check what was the rainfall there with the rainfall at the station, do an inverse distance interpolation, and if that value is within certain deviation of the observed value, then you are correct, you are fine. But if your neighboring stations have some large value and you observe a small value, that's a suspect station. And this was so complicated that every month when they get the data, they had like hundreds of stations. Somebody would sit down, run these calculations, and do it for a few stations. It was tedious, you can't check every station. So they said, can you implement this? And you can say, I can write some Python code to do this. Right? That is a reasonable way to do this. You can kind of build a script to do this. But the organization, they had nobody who wrote Python. So if I gave them a Python code, I have to teach them how to run it, how to use it, how to debug errors, and they won't be able to maintain it themselves. But they were using QGIS. If I implemented everything in QGIS, they can maintain it. And that was a big reason to use the Model Designer and the built-in QGIS tools so that they can run it themselves, they'll be independent, and they can maintain it as well. First thing, how do you find neighbors? There's a nifty function in the expression engine of QGIS called aggregate function, which allows you to find neighbors of each feature. So you can write expressions where you say, for each feature, go and look around other features and find neighbors within certain condition. And here the condition turned out, look at within 10 kilometers, but check the angle that is formed from each station to the neighbor. If the angle is between 0 to 90, that's the first quadrant. If the angle is between 90 and 180, it's a second quadrant. And you can just write those 4 expressions, and you'll pick those neighbors in this particular quadrant. So this is what it looks like. You now run this first step, and now you have found all the neighboring stations in each quadrant that met the condition. Okay? And this just takes a minute, less than 30 seconds to run in QGIS. And now you have implemented this very complex nearest neighbor selection. Once you have those neighboring stations, you now want to identify outliers. QGIS has this really nice array functions, which allows you to iterate within the expression engine. It's like for loops, but within the QGIS expression. So now you can say I have this 8 neighbors. For each neighbor, do something. But that runs within an expression. So say for each station, go and find all the rainfall at each of the neighbors and do this inverse distance weighting. And it runs 8 times within the expression. So it's like a for loop within the expression. And once you have this, you implement your formula, and then you add an attribute saying, if this met the condition, this was great. If it didn't meet the condition, mark it as a suspect station. This is what the model looks like, just by running the QGIS expressions one step after the other, where you say, select your input source, select the neighboring field, and it runs, and just runs those expressions one by one. And out comes this output layer, which has got this marked each station, which is valid or not. Here's how the model runs. So it's in your toolbox. You open it, you select the new source that was given to you every month. You configure the inputs, and you just set your limit, and you just run it. And this is real time. It just takes a few seconds. And there are 700 stations here. Right? It just goes and takes this, and you open your attribute table, and suddenly you have marked every station whether it met the condition or not. In the full model that we built, there was also some data validation. They were so annoyed that the provider they were giving them, they spelled the stations differently than their other provider. So they said, how we have to change this Excel file every time. So here we had one step, rename just some expression saying, if the station name is this, rename it to that, and then run the model. Right? So again, you can kind of do all this kind of data checks and validation before you run this. So now they're very happy that we just run our source and we get the output. This solved a big problem. I met them after 5 years recently and said, your model still is running. Right? So again, this is something to keep in mind, where you kind of give a solution that the client can maintain themselves. It is as a longevity. I'm sure if I'd given them a Python script, it won't be running today. The last tip before we end the talk, this was a really painful thing that was fixed recently. When you have a large model, let's say you have a model which has 100 steps, and you are building a model, you're debugging it. Model runs, after 10 minutes, you reach step 99, and something fails. And say, oh, I know what is wrong. So you go and fix it, and then you start the model from step 1 again. Or if you just say, oh, I wish I had renamed my field in step 50. So you have to run the whole model again. Now, you run it once, all the intermediate outputs are cached. So the next time you want to run it, you can say, don't run everything, just run these steps. You select this and say run selected steps, and you'll use those cached inputs to running the next step. Super helpful when you're developing and debugging the models. It's a great improvement in your speed of development and maintaining those models. If you're curious about any of these and say, hey, I really want this expression that you use to compute neighbors, or I really want to know how to render my print layout, everything is documented. One of the things I'm very particular about is whenever I finish a project, the reason I do consulting project is so I can teach others how to do the same thing. So once I finish a project, I'll find some open data. I'll make sure I'm not violating any NDAs or proprietary information, and I document this in a way so the others can learn. And so everything that has been shown has been documented, so you can go and say, how do I set this up? How do I run this? And if you're interested in kind of exploring more advanced model designer, you can check out a new workshop. I taught that yesterday, but it's also available on our open courseware site. There is a way to now integrate Google Earth Engine within the QGIS Model Designer. There's a new plugin that has some processing tools. So now if your workflow involves fetching data from cloud, you can say, fetch the new Sentinel data from yesterday, fetch it as a GeoTIFF file, run my model, and you can also integrate that. And if you want to also see how to do some input validation, saying that if my NDVI was greater than this, don't do the next step. You can see how to implement those conditions in this model. That's it. We'll take questions. If you had any questions about case studies or in Model Designer in general, please do ask. Yes, there's a question.
Can I export the model that I designed? Can I export that as a script, so as a Python script or something like that?
Yeah. The question is, can I export the model as a Python script? Yes. So if you take your model in QGIS and right-click, there's an option to export that as a Python algorithm. This will give you like a PyQGIS script that is equivalent to the model design, the model work. And this is useful. For example, there are certain limitations in the Model Designer where you can't do certain things, or you say, I really need to call this Python API in between those two steps. So you can build this visually, and now you have a Python script, which you can say, between these two steps, let me plug in some Python code that I can use. So yes, it is possible to export that. And I've had some people do that, and then they stick this Python script on the server, and then they have a web client that can trigger that Python script. Like, so if you want this kind of workflows, you can also use that. Yes?
Just back to your point about the client you had, and you know, 5 years of running a model, and I heard you say that would be the case if you gave them a Python script. In your view, what's the main advantage over the model compared to the script?
Yeah, the question is, what's the main advantage of doing a model over a Python script? I think it depends on the capability that the person who's going to use has, and what are the skill sets. If the person is able to maintain and use a Python script, Python is definitely more flexible. It can do a lot more. But if you are a QGIS user and your workflow involves QGIS, having that stuff in your QGIS is a huge improvement in how you handle the workflows. It also helps, for example, they say now this validation is done by an intern. So they can hire an intern who can just launch this model, versus then they had to hire somebody who knows Python, right? So again, it makes it more accessible, I would say. And then, as we discussed previously, a model is a Python script. So if there are people who are skilled enough, they say, I can take this and I can add some improvement to this. So it also kind of helps them move in the other direction as well. Yeah.
Just following from that, and in that direction, so if you were to like take the model and then if you want to make some modification with Python, will QGIS then be able to like reuse that modified workflow that you've
Yeah, the question is, if you take the Python just generated by the model, modify it, will the model be understanding? My sense is not. But if you wrote a valid PyQGIS using the processing API, it will still run within QGIS as a kind of script. But I don't think the model will pick up that step and give you a box there. I don't think.
And another separate question I had, is it possible to use like a community or plugin that maybe, let's say I've developed a plugin that for a client that they need specifically, but I want to use the modeler because I don't want them to have to run things with Python. Can the modeler ingest a community plugin or a plugin that I've created and it's loaded with a zip file?
Yeah, the question is, can you use plugins within the Model Designer? You can, as long as the plugin exposes some Python algorithms which are written with the PyQGIS API. So if a plugin creates a processing algorithm, those are available within the Model Designer. And that's how, if you see this is Google Earth Engine, this is a plugin which exposes some Python algorithms, which is able to fetch data from the third-party service. And that gets exposed into your processing toolbox. And once you have plugins like this, which are now, I think, de facto standard, a lot of people just build plugins which add processing tools. So you can plug those in your model as well. So that gives you the flexibility to build those. And I highly encourage, if you're building plugins, please build processing algorithms that enables this kind of use cases versus just having a static UI that you have to launch. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got two questions. The first question is very specific. So, with set layer, set style for layer, one issue we have with teams is that if I'm running a model and then someone else is running a model, it'll break because it's trying to set the layer, but it's calling to the path. And with teams, everyone's path is different because they're
Yeah, the question is, when you are setting a path in your model, everybody's path is different on the disk. How do you set different path? I'll give you two options. One is put it on a shared network folder, which everybody has, which is in a corporate setting that works well. So you're always pointing to a folder, and you're always pointing to the canonical version. Somebody made an update to the style. You have a shared network folder that everybody can access. And that's kind of the easiest way to do this, where you say, there's a shared network thing, and you can write there. Other one you can do is, in some of the models I've used this, where you can use expression to construct a path. So you can say, based on the, you can have your user's username set as a variable in a QGIS project, and you can use that variable to say, my path is C / that variable / downloads or whatever, right? So you can construct the path dynamically. If you see the FIRE model, that has that thing which constructs the path of the output folder dynamically, where you can have a different path based on the variable.
The other question was, sorry, execute and load from SQL. Is there a way to stop everything becoming an output in your project?
The question is, can you stop certain outputs loaded by default? I don't know about that particular tool. Most tools have a way to not load outputs in your project. So I think the way the standard processing tools works, you can say, don't load my output. It's generally a temporary layer. If it's an intermediate layer, it will not load the layer in your project. So I don't know about the specific tool. It might be generating by default. There's also an issue with one of the Earth Engine tools, which always loads it, and there's no way to stop it. Yesterday in the workshop, we were discussing, we need a tool in the toolbox, unload a layer from my project. There's a load layer in the project. Maybe there's a way to say, this tool always adds this layer. We should have it, step, please unload things that were loaded by the previous one, and that will be helpful. Thank you. Just a plug for a conference that's happening in India. We are organizing FOSS4G Asia, which is happening in India. If you always wanted to visit India and meet open source people, this is your opportunity. So please do come to India. I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.